Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Nikki. I was diagnosed with autism at 23 and I make videos where I talk about autism and my experience, and I advocate for change in the community to better the life of other autistic people. And I have more than 12,000 followers on TikTok, so if you want to check that out, I would greatly appreciate that. But yeah, that's where I'm more active and I post a lot more there. But yeah, today I'm going to do a story time video about the job that I was recently fired from. And a couple years ago, I did a story time about a job that I was fired from. And yes, it happened again. And I'm going to be telling you that story today. But I think that this is an important story to tell because it's, unemployment is a serious issue in the autism community. And I think telling my story will shed light as to why a lot of autistic people struggle with keeping jobs, because it's not that a lot of us don't have a good work ethic. I think I have a great work ethic, It's just that a lot of these workplaces are set up in a way that we fail. So I'm going to tell this story to hopefully shed light on changes that need to be made. For a little bit of backstory, I was living in Omaha, Nebraska. It's where I had been living for the past 10 years. And in the beginning of 2024, I started dating a guy long distance that I met on TikTok. Which I know that's weird, but he's an awesome guy. I met this wonderful guy on TikTok in the very beginning of 2024. And, we started talking online and stuff like that. And we started a long distance relationship where we would FaceTime each other like every single day, almost the whole day, like when either of us were not at work. And this guy lives in Las Vegas. And I was living in Omaha, Nebraska. And then in July of 2024, I took my first trip out to Vegas to meet him in person. And we really hit it off and I fell deeply in love with him. And after that, I took many trips out to Vegas over the next several months to visit him. And basically, to sum it all up, I decided that I wanted to move out here to be with him. So I was gonna move to Vegas and we were gonna, start the next chapter of our lives together and stuff. So I knew that my lease at the apartment that I was living in was coming to an end in June of 2025. So my plan was, when my lease at my Nebraska apartment ended, I was gonna move. But, for me to be able to move, I needed to find a job out in Vegas, right? And I was at a wonderful job back in Omaha, Nebraska. And, I was kind of sad at the thought of leaving that job because it was such a good job. It was, it really worked well for my disability. But I really wanted to be with my boyfriend. He's a wonderful guy, and I knew that it was worth it to take a chance. And to give up this amazing job that I was in and, take a chance on another job and hope that that job will be just as good. So the new year of, 2025 begins, and, I'm starting to plan things out a little bit more because, this is going to be a big move, obviously. So, there's a lot of planning that has to go into that. And I was originally not going to start looking for new jobs until it was closer to June. I was going to wait until March or April to start applying for things. But a lot of people advised me, due to the current job market, that it was probably best that I started looking for jobs as soon as possible because it could take me 6 months to find something. I started doing that because, I didn't want to possibly be in a situation where I would be, my lease would come to an end in June, and then I would want to move, and obviously I don't want to sign another year lease when I'm wanting to move, but me not have a job and be left with the choice of either, going month to month at my Nebraska apartment and having to pay a lot more in rent, or moving without a job lined up and taking a chance with that, which I didn't want to do that either. Or probably just not signing another lease or going month to month and just living with my mom until I can get something lined up in Vegas. So yeah, I decided let's just start applying for jobs. That way I have plenty of time to find something before my lease ends. Start applying for every job that I can find that, you know, meets what I'm qualified for and stuff. I'm mainly applying for like accounting positions or like accounts payable and stuff like that. At the time I was working in premium auditing, and I had been in an accounting and accounts payable position before. The accounts payable position was where I was bullied, and then I had previously worked as an accountant and was fired from that job. Check out that story time. So that's what I was looking for. I was looking to maybe get back into accounting and give it another try. You know, at this point I had a couple more years of corporate work experience under my belt, so I thought maybe I'll have a better experience, you know, working as an accountant in a different company. You know, maybe my manager will be more supportive and be able to give me more, you know, accommodations and stuff if I need it. So I apply for things and I go to a few interviews like over Zoom and stuff like that. And, you know, I get rejected from those jobs. And then I notice a position open on Indeed, and it's through a staffing agency, and it's a temp to hire bookkeeping job. And so I figured, you know, I'm qualified for this. And, you know, usually with temp to hire jobs, you know, it's just like what it sounds like. You know, you're hired onto the job. You start out as a temporary employee, so you're technically employed through the staffing agency, not the company you're working for. You know, and as long as you know, do a good job at the job, they will typically offer you permanent employment. And I thought I shouldn't have an issue with that because I'm a hard worker, and, you know, I'm sure that I would have no issues getting the permanent job. So put in my application for it. I will drop the name of the staffing agency that I used. It was Randstad. So yeah, I applied, and then a few days later, I get a phone call from a recruiter at Randstad. I'm not going to say their actual name, so we'll call him Shane for the purpose of this video. Shane calls me and lets me know that, hey, I see that you applied for the bookkeeping position. I actually think that you would be a really good fit for this. And, you know, I would like to send your information off to the hiring manager, or like the lady that would, you know, would be supervising me. A phone call with Shane, and, you know, he basically gets some basic information from me about like my education, my experience, things like that. And then he tells me about this bookkeeping job. For the purpose of this video, we're gonna call the manager that I would be working under, we're gonna call her Karen, because I think it's a good name. So yeah, he starts telling me about the role in the company and stuff like that. And he said, I'm gonna send your information off to Karen, and we'll see if, you know, she is interested in an interview with you. You know, and one of the things that he tells me about this job is that Karen really likes her team to feel like a family. Now in hindsight, that's a red flag. But I didn't see that as a red flag. I thought, well, you know, I've worked for places before where, you know, the team has felt like a family, like just kind of naturally, because you're working with those people every single day. So you kind of like just organically form bonds with people. So I thought, you know, when he said she wants the team to feel like a family, I thought maybe he meant, you know, this is a warm and welcoming environment, you know, and I thought that's just perfect because, you know, I had worked previously for a job where I was bullied, and I really didn't want to have to experience that again. So I was like, you know, yeah, I would love to work for somewhere like that where it's a warm and welcoming environment, you know. And he did tell me that Karen is a very sweet lady. So that seemed really good too, and really promising. So yeah, he sends my information off to her, and he has me take a few assessments that, like, they were about like assessing my Excel knowledge, my accounting knowledge, stuff like that. and I passed all of the tests with flying colors. Like, he said that I got like scored in the 90s in all 3 of them. So he and Karen were actually quite impressed at my scores. So this is the beginning of February, is kind of the timeline of all of this. And so I was actually planning a trip to Vegas in February for Valentine's Day. I was actually going to be staying here for 2 weeks because me and my boyfriend's like dating anniversary is at the end of February. So I was actually going to stay here for 2 weeks. My job had given me permission to take my laptop and work from here so that I could do this. So like, they were so wonderful to do that for me. But my intention while I was here for 2 weeks was to do, to attend job interviews and stuff like that. So I let Shane know that, I'm going to be in town, around at the middle of the month to the end of the month. So if anybody wants to schedule an interview with me, I will be available to do in-person interviews. So after I complete all the assessments and all my information is sent off to Karen, Shane gets back to me and lets me know Karen would like to schedule an in-person interview with you, like the day after I flew into town to be here for 2 weeks. So I get into town and I go to the interview, and the interview goes okay. I didn't think it went that good, but apparently it went fine, because a few days later I get another message from Shane saying that Karen wants me to come back for a second round interview to meet with one of the other managers. So I go and do that, and then 2 days after the second round interview, I get a phone call from Shane to let me know that they want to offer me the position. So that made me very excited, because that meant that, that's my ticket to being able to move to Vegas and be with my boyfriend. I remember when I was talking on the phone with Shane about this position, he said something about that I was going to be replacing someone that was not performing well. In hindsight, that was a bit of a red flag, but I didn't think much of it. I was so excited just to be able to be with my boyfriend and to not be long distance anymore. So obviously I was going to be giving a 2-week notice to my job in Nebraska because they were amazing to me, and I felt like I owed it to them to give them that courtesy. So I fly back to Nebraska and I give my 2-week notice to my amazing premium auditing job, and I still miss that job, but I give them my 2 weeks notice and I start packing my apartment. My boyfriend also comes into town to help me with packing because we were going to be, both of us driving back to Vegas, making the trip together. So yeah, we do all of that. And then like the day after I get back to Nebraska, I get a call from Shane, and he lets me know that I'm gonna have to run a background check and a credit check on you, because that's like a requirement for this job. And I'm like, sure, fine. There shouldn't be any issues or anything. Like, I've always had good credit, and I don't have any criminal record of any sort, so there shouldn't have been an issue. And so he lets me know, I'll let you know once the background check and credit check passes and everything is good to go. And so, a week goes by, I still don't hear anything. It's my last, at this point, it's my last full week at my Nebraska job. And then, another week goes by. My last day at my Nebraska job ended up being on Monday because it was supposed to be Tuesday, but long story short, my boyfriend got into a car accident with my car, and my car got totaled literally 2 days before we were supposed to leave to go to Vegas. So like perfect timing. So I had to like deal with my insurance and all those stuff. I was able to get a rental car. I got like a minivan. So there was room to put all of my boxes and things like that into it. And then, you know, we were able to drive that to Vegas, and then I ended up buying a new car once I got here. But yeah, my last day ended up being a day a day sooner, because I had to spend what should have been my last day dealing with insurance and all of the stuff with the accident. But you know, that same day, so it's the day before I'm supposed to go to Vegas or start the drive, and I still haven't heard anything from Shane about my background check. And, you know, again, I didn't think that there would have been any problems, but, you know, I was starting to get a little bit concerned that maybe they found something, you know, on my credit report or something that, you know, is concerning. I mean, not that they should have. Like, I have a 700 plus credit score, so there shouldn't have been any issues other than maybe my credit card debt. But yeah, so I decide I'm gonna follow up. I'm gonna call Shane and try to follow up with him. Like, I heard nothing from him, like radio silence, you know, nothing from him. You'd think that he would have been like checking in with me and all those things, but you know, I decided to give him a call because I'm literally getting in the car and driving across the country the next day, and I wanted to make sure everything was good to go before I left town, you know. I go to call him and it goes to voicemail. So then I call one of the other recruiters that I had, you know, worked with a little bit as well during the process of me finding another job. And he checks my credit or my stuff and lets me know, yeah, everything's good, everything's passed, you know, you're good to start on Monday. So it's Wednesday. No, it's Tuesday. So I'm going to be starting the job Monday, because we were going to spend Wednesday and Thursday driving to Vegas. Spoiler alert, a blizzard happened in Nebraska the next day. Like, it was like a 75-degree day on that Tuesday, and then Wednesday a blizzard happens, and then the interstate gets shut down. We made it like an hour into the drive, and then we had to stop, and we had to stay in a Motel 6 for the night, and then we did the rest of the driving, like 17 hours all on that Thursday. So I got to Vegas pretty late, almost midnight on that Tuesday or Thursday. That's not really that relevant to the story, but that's just a detail. I get to Vegas, and another detail to the story. I was going to be staying at my boyfriend's parents' house. He was still living with his parents. Nothing wrong with that, because, you know, shit in this economy is expensive and rent is expensive. So I don't blame anybody that still lives with their parents in their 20s. But yeah, because I forgot to mention the detail about my lease. I was still paying rent on my lease, and I was going to pay rent until it ended the 1st of June. So I was going to be staying at his parents' house until my lease was up, so I wasn't paying rent for 2 apartments, you know. Yeah, so, you know, I get to Vegas and I get settled into, you know, my temporary home with my cat. And, you know, I get ready to start, you know, I wake up the next day, it's Friday, because we got here early, or late Thursday. And I remember, like, as soon as I got here, and, you know, like, that excitement of, like, the drive here and, you know, leaving and stuff like that, like, after that wore off, I started to have, I don't know, like, feelings of dread around starting my new job. Like, there was just something inside of me that, you know, I wasn't looking forward to it. And I just kept brushing it off as, you know, this is a big change for me. You know, I've moved across the country, and I'm now living in a new city. And, you know, the other thing is my job that I had back in Nebraska was hybrid. So I got to work from home 3 days a week. And then this is a job where my new job, I was going to be working in the office 5 days a week. So it was a big change just with that. So that's just what I tried to think of it was. And then Sunday night rolls around, and I'm experiencing the Sunday scaries before I even start this job. Like, hadn't even met any of the people that I worked with other than Karen and then another manager. And that was it. And I was already just like absolutely dreading it. And then I start the job the next day, and I will say that going from a job where I only had to work in the office twice a week to one where I'm now working in the office 5 days a week, that was a big change. And I thought, it's probably going to be normal for me to struggle to adjust to this, but eventually I will adjust to it, right? Give it a couple months, I will be fine. But I will say that I immediately started to get into a really, really bad burnout, almost instantly. I was feeling burned out, because again, I was used to working from home 3 days a week, and at least having most of my time that I was at work, I didn't feel like I had to mask or do anything like that. I felt like I had to mask. I had to hold back on stimming and things like that I could, that I can do working from home. My second day of the job, we had a team lunch. It was supposed to be like a welcome lunch for me, because there was like a restaurant that was in the building that I worked at. And everybody was chatting, and, they seemed like they were all best friends. And, I'm autistic and I have a hard time with social interaction. And so oftentimes in group settings, when I'm with people that I don't know as well or I'm as comfortable with, I have a hard time like jumping into conversations. So I was just sitting there kind of being quiet. And, I felt like, again, that I needed to be socializing, I remember I immediately thought back to that comment that Shane had said to me on the phone when we first spoke about how Karen likes her team to feel like a family. And I thought, well, by family, does she mean it's a high school clique where people have to, if you don't fit in, you're not welcome there? Because keep in mind, this was a temp to hire position, meaning if, there was no guarantee that I was going to have a long-term job, they could decide after the temp period ended that they didn't like me and they could send me on my way and I would be without a job. And I didn't want that. I wanted them to like me and I wanted them to be, to see me as a good fit for the job, and I didn't want to have to worry, But yeah, as I mentioned, I very quickly became super burned out by this job. It would get to a point where I dreaded going into work every single day. I felt like I was just counting down the minutes until Friday at 5:00 when I could go home. I know that with most jobs, you're not going to be extremely excited about going to work every single day, but it's one thing it's a completely different thing to have a job that you absolutely dread going to every single day. And that's how I felt about this job. I dreaded it every single day. I felt like my weekends were not long enough. Like the weekends would fly by so fast, and then it's already Monday and I have to wake up and go to this job. Not to mention, I fucking hated the commute to this job. It was, the job is located in downtown, and I would have to commute, it was like a 30+ minute commute with the traffic, because the traffic on the highway is always stop and go. I'm from Nebraska, so traffic is nowhere near what it is here in Vegas in Nebraska. So that's a big thing, big adjustment. I still, almost 6 months of living here, I still fucking hate driving here. Seriously. Probably the thing I hate the most about living in Vegas is the drivers here. I could do a whole another rant about drivers here. Fucking hate it. If I want to, that's why I never leave my house unless I have to, or if I do leave, I like to stay in my area of town. I avoid the Strip for the most part. Or if I do want to go out somewhere, I usually have my boyfriend drive us because I don't like drivers here. But I had to deal with this stop and go traffic every day, and that was also like overwhelming for me, especially for someone who, again, I have driving anxiety as it is. But, you know, having to deal with much more awful traffic than what I'm used to, plus driving anxiety, like, yeah, that overwhelmed me. Like, I was already overstimulated just from the drive to the job by the time I walked into the door. So it's no wonder I was just so burned out. And the other thing that I hate about a job where I have a commute is that, like, you waste like over an hour of your day. You know, like when you get to work from home, you have so much more time in your day because you don't have a commute that you have to make time for. You know, you don't have to put yourself together. You know, you can roll out of bed if you want to. So yeah, but yeah, so almost instantly I just experienced this intense burnout from this job. I believe it was 2 weeks into me living here. There was an air show that my boyfriend and I were planning to attend, and you know, as I obviously moved here sooner than I had planned to, but we had been planning to go to this for months. Like, if I was still in Nebraska, I would have flown out here and attended. And you know, the night before, I decided, you know, I don't want to go. I feel really burned out right now, and I need to stay home and I need to rest. And he went by himself without me. So that shows that, like, I was so burned out that I couldn't handle, I didn't have the capacity to handle going to an event where there was going to be a bunch of people, you know, and it was going to be loud. You know, I needed to stay at home. So that's what I did. Weekends, most of the time, were of me laying in bed and not hardly doing anything, because I was so burned out that I had no energy to do anything. I would just bed rot all day. I wouldn't be able to bring myself to get out of bed and do anything somewhat productive, and it really sucked. It felt like I was wasting my weekends, you know, because, yeah, you know, I didn't feel like doing anything. I wanted to do stuff, but it was just like I couldn't get myself to get out of bed. So that just shows you where I was. And then every Sunday, the Sunday scaries would happen. You know, I would just be, you know, there would just be this pit in my stomach that I have to go back to this job tomorrow and I don't want to. Talk about some specific things about this job. It was a small team. You know, as far as the accounting team goes, or like the people that worked in the office. So like the accounting team, it was the controller, who that was Karen, and then me, and then 2 other ladies. And then the other 2 people that worked in our office were property managers. And then we had like some security guards that worked at like a front desk, and that was it. But yeah, like I felt like this was a team where like they wanted people to be social. Like, you know, one of my coworkers would always just be hanging out in Karen's office, just talking about personal stuff. You know, and then, yeah. As far as the job, I felt like I was, you know, the job itself, the work that I was doing was okay. You know, I mean, I was making minor mistakes on things, but I feel like it was mistakes that, like, with time, you know, I would eventually improve in those things. Like, I didn't feel like there was anything to be concerned about. But yeah, I had a coworker who would help me a lot with training. And here's the thing, I'm not always the fastest learner. You know, I will eventually get things. It's just that they need to be explained to me enough times, and they need to be explained to me in a way that makes sense. But this one lady, you know, she was really nice, and she would always help me with training. But then eventually Karen told her to back off, you know, and said that I needed to learn how to be more independent, you know, and I'm like, what the hell? I don't see me asking for help, you know, and me asking questions on how to do things, you know, until I can understand how to do it correctly by myself. I don't understand how that, you know, that's a lack of independence, or that's hand holding or whatever. Like I don't just learn something efficiently or sufficiently after being taught one time how to do it. And the thing is, in accounting, you know, you have a lot of tasks that you do on a monthly basis. So, you know, the first month that I was there, I would be trained on how to do something, you know, and then I would be expected to do that thing the next month by myself. But then I would forget how to do it, you know, because it's only been a month since I last was taught how to do it, you know, and I'm gonna have to do it so many times until I understand, or I can do it completely by myself without having to ask for help. You know, it's not going to take me 1 month to master my job duties. I don't know what Karen was thinking, you know. And, you know, if you watched my story time about the first time that I got fired from a job, I talked about how I have a very difficult time with note-taking because of my auditory processing issues, which is a very common trait in a lot of autistic people. Yeah. So, you know, for anyone that's going to be like, well, you should have been taking notes during training. I'm like, well, it's not that easy when you have a very difficult time with note-taking, you know, like, yeah. Karen never really, like, on a regular basis did she meet with me to discuss performance, like any, you know, if I was meeting performance expectations, because, like, again, as this was a temp to hire position, so, you know, I wanted to make you know, I would have liked to have made sure that I was on the right track, you know, because initially my hope was that I would have a permanent opportunity with this job. I eventually grew to resent this job, but I'm gonna get there. But initially I wanted to work there permanently. And, you know, there was no conversation like on feedback or anything like that, or, you know, if there were some performance concerns, which again, I was never made aware of any, if there was no conversation about, like, what do you need to be successful? You know, do you need more training? Do you need this or that? None of that. There was no communication. So as the time goes on of me being at this job, I just grow to hate it even more. You know, I keep getting more and more burned out. My weekends keep, you know, I keep feeling more and more less motivated on the weekends. Like, yeah, I remember there was one weekend where I hadn't eaten all day. I couldn't even get myself to, like, go make food for myself. And my boyfriend was so kind, and he went and got takeout and brought it up to his room for me to eat. So the fact that I couldn't even leave bed, that tells you this is not healthy. But yeah, so it's getting closer to June at this point, and, you know, my lease I'm gonna, you know, no longer be paying rent on my Nebraska apartment. So, you know, me and my boyfriend start looking at places to rent so that we can get out of his parents' house and I can get into a place where I can unpack everything and fully settle in and not be living in, you know, a temporary situation like I was. So yeah, we get approved for a rental home, which is where I'm sitting right now. And we were supposed to move that rental home on the 2nd of June. So that was a Monday. And I wanted to be, you know, my boyfriend currently gets Mondays off from work. So he already had the day off. But I wanted to take the day off too so that I could be around to unpack things and, like, help settle in, because I'm also, like, kind of OCD and I want my things a certain way. I don't want other people touching my things because I don't want them doing something to my things that is not going to be the way I want them done, if that makes sense. Like, that's very common in autism. but I wanted to be able to unpack things and arrange things, you know, my stuff the way I wanted it. Because yeah, it would have given me anxiety if I would have been at work and someone else was touching my stuff and arranging my stuff in a way that I didn't want it arranged. Does anyone else relate to like OCD tendencies? But anyway, yeah, I wanted to take the day off. And so I let my manager know, Karen, you know, I want to take Monday off so that I can do all the moving stuff. Because I was under the impression that I had PTO. I mean, yes, I was a temp to hire position. You know, I wasn't technically, I was employed by Randstad, not by the company that I was going to work at every single day. So, I mean, I knew that I wasn't getting their benefits, but when Shane and I were talking on the phone discussing the job offer, he mentioned to me that I got 10 days of PTO. So I was under the impression that I got those 10 days of PTO when I first started the job, you know. There was no, he wasn't specific about, you know, this PTO doesn't happen or doesn't start until a certain time, or it doesn't start until you're, you know, brought on permanently with the company. So I was under the impression that I had PTO and that I could take Monday off and get paid for it, you know. So I let Karen know, and then she reaches out to him to let him know that I'm planning to take the day off. And then Shane gets back with Karen and tells her that, oh, she doesn't have any PTO accrued. And then Karen comes over to my desk and lets me know, and I'm like, what the hell? I was told when I took this job that I had 10 days. You know, I know that some people are gonna be like, well, it's common sense. If you're a temp, you don't get benefits like that. Well, again, this was my first time working as a temp, first of all. And second, I'm autistic and I don't get common sense, and I need things explained explicitly to me. So I was quite upset because I'm like, well, if I want to take the day off, it means it's going to be unpaid. And if I take the day off, I lose $200 some dollars. That's how much like I would net pay that I earned each day at this job. This job was the highest paying job that I've ever had to this day. And I'm like, well, I don't want to do that because, you know, it's going to kind of fuck me up financially if I have to miss one day of pay. And then I also, Memorial Day had just happened, and I wasn't even aware that I didn't get paid holidays. And so then I realized, oh no, I guess that means I didn't get paid for Memorial Day either. So there's another day of pay that I missed. So right there, it's like $500 that I'm losing out on. So I was quite upset, and I was like, this pisses me off, you know. And I also had just realized how burned out this job was making me. I think I was in denial this whole entire time, and I didn't want to admit that this job was burning me out. But then I think the PTO situation just really was what set me off. And I was like, I you know what? I hate this job. I don't want to be here anymore. I want to get out. I want to go to a job where I can work from home again. You know, I hate this commute, you know, because I realized this job and this environment is what is burning me out. It's why I can't get out of bed on the weekends. You know, it's why I get the Sunday scaries every week. Point, I was like, I'm just going, that's it. Like, I need to start looking for new jobs. This is not going to work out for me. You know, having to work in the office every single day, I could not do. You know, I thought I could do it. I used to have jobs where I had to work in the office 5 days a week, but I just couldn't do it. You know, and the reality is when you're autistic, you know, it's common to experience skill regression. It's common to, like, as you get more burned out in life, it's common to not be able to do things that you were once able to do. And I think working in an office 5 days a week is something that I realized I can no longer do. So I was just like, you know, I don't want to deal with this. I need to find something that's going to work better for me. You know, I hated having that commute every day. You know, I hated having to wear business casual clothes that weren't that comfortable. I hated feeling this pressure to socialize with my coworkers. Like, I felt like, you know, we would do team outings and stuff like that, and I felt like I I felt like I was being looked at wrong, I guess, because I wasn't being able to socialize with the team, because of my disability and my impairment in my ability to socialize. Didn't affect my ability to be a bookkeeper. Like, I could, do that. My social skills have nothing to do with accounting skills, right? So it's not like I wasn't capable of doing the job because of my lack of ability to socialize. It's just, yeah, I'm going to be more quiet and I'm going to be more to myself in the office. I'm not going to be chatting, but why is that an issue? I'm getting the job done. Is that what I'm here for? I'm here to do work. I'm not here to make friends. I was just at this point where I'm just going to start applying for new jobs. And as soon as I find something that's better, I'm leaving. I knew that I wanted to go back to premium auditing. I just learned that was a much better fit for me than accounting was. And I'm going to make a whole separate video about why I'm never going to work in accounting ever again. But I started looking for premium auditing jobs or any kind of jobs in the insurance industry that I could do working from home, because I was just like, from now on, working 100% in the office is a complete no-go for me. I cannot do it, and I need something where it's either remote, hybrid, or they would at least be willing to give me ADA accommodations where I can work remotely, even if typically people work in the office. So at this point, it's the second week of June, and little do I know at the end of the week, it was going to be my last week at this job, but I'm gonna get there. I get an email from a job that I had applied for to be a remote premium auditor. And spoiler alert, it's the job that I work at now. But, they tell me that they want to schedule a phone interview with me. And so I do that phone interview like later that week during my lunch break. And then they schedule me a Zoom interview the following week. So it makes me happy because I'm like, I have a shot at getting out of this job. And so, like I said, my intention was to leave as soon as I got something lined up. But the job that I was at, the bookkeeping job, made that decision for me. So the Friday of that week, so, it's 2 weeks after I moved into my rental home that I live in now. It's the end of the day, it's about 4:00, and I'm just sitting at my desk, doing stuff. And then Karen walks over to my desk and she asks me to come into her office to speak with me. And I had a feeling that, I actually had a gut feeling that they were going to be letting me go. I feel like if you've ever been fired before, you usually see it coming. It's never a complete surprise. Yeah, I go into her office. I figured it was, her firing me because it's the end of the day, so why would it be anything else? And so I sit down and she starts the conversation saying, have you heard anything lately from Shane? And I'm like, no, I haven't heard from him for a while. That's another thing. Shane never talked to me. Like, the communication after I got the job was very, few and far in between. There was, I think, 1 or 2 times he sent me a text message and just kind of casually checked in. Hey, how are things going? Never, the staffing agency I worked with back in Omaha was amazing, and they were constantly checking in with me. He never did anything. Never, there was never any communication with me. But she goes off to say, this is going to be a difficult conversation, but, we're not able to offer you a permanent position with us, but best of luck, in your future endeavors. That's basically what she tells me, and she says that my temp assignment is ending as of today. So I go back to my desk, I pack everything up, and I drive away. And, I'll just say that, obviously it's stressful in any situation to lose a job when you're not expecting it. you know, I just moved into a house for rent. So, you know, I had bills and stuff to pay, you know, but at the same time, it felt like I was being released from a prison sentence because I hated this job so much. This job burned me out, and I felt like, you know, my future is a little uncertain at the moment, but I would rather be unemployed than be in a job that is causing me so much burnout the way that job was causing me. I was also very relieved that at this point I had an interview lined up already for another job, a second round interview. So, you know, I felt like it's going to work out because, you know, I already knew that I had a good chance at getting another job anyway. So yeah, spoiler alert, I did get that new job as a premium auditor. So I work from home 5 days a week, doing a job that I'm pretty good at. You know, I just started the job. I just finished up with training. I don't, you know, starting out, you don't make a whole lot of money in this job, but, you know, it's paid off of an hourly rate plus bonuses based off of your production. So as I get my production and like quality numbers up, I will get more and more bonuses. Right now I'm getting paid like not that much. You know, like I make enough money to pay my rent and have food to eat, and that's about it, you know, and pay for my car and insurance. But eventually I can actually make, you know, 6 figures if I really, really work hard. So I'm very happy with that. It's a much better fit for me. I'm so happy to be away from that prison, that bookkeeping job, because it did feel like prison. I'm sure this video is probably an hour long, but I did want to take a second to kind of summarize some things about why that job was not a good fit for me. It wasn't a good fit because of having to work in the office. And, you know, if you follow my TikTok page, I make a ton of videos about how working from home is a godsend to a lot of autistic people. You know, it can be very, very difficult to work in an office. And it really makes me mad that so many of these corporate jobs are making people return to the office. Why? You know, when your job has been, you know, people have been able to work remotely for so many years, and now you're making everyone go back to the office. It makes no sense. You know, if places were more open to work from home, then honestly, these jobs would be more accessible to autistic people. And the other thing I want to talk about of why this job didn't work for me was I felt this pressure that I needed to put on this performance socially. You know, a lot of these workplaces, and this is unfortunately very common, and again, another thing that I make TikToks about a lot, is that, you know, it's not very uncommon for an autistic person to get fired from a job because they're not being social enough, you know? I mean, so many people comment on my TikToks about, I got fired because I wasn't eating lunch with the team and I was eating lunch by myself. It's just, you know, again, they have to understand that autistic people need time alone a lot. You know, being around people all day long, especially when it's not necessary, is very, very draining. And again, in a lot of cases, it's not necessary to the job. Like, I could have been just as good of a bookkeeper as someone who was more social. And, you know, a lot of us struggle with social interaction, you know. But again, back to that comment about how Karen likes her team to feel like a family. I think that was code word for Karen likes her team to feel like a clique in high school. So she, you know, and I'm fully convinced, I guess I should go back to why they decided not to pursue a permanent offer with me. Well, I did have a phone call after I got home that day with Shane. I had one last call with him. And he told me that he, you know, apparently he and Karen had been regularly in touch with each other, but you know, there was never hardly ever any communication with me. Like, it should have been both sides, where, you know, not only are they making sure that the job, you know, the employer is satisfied with me, but also that I am satisfied with the employer. They never checked in with me or anything like that. So I personally will never ever work with Randstad ever again for that reason. I just wasn't impressed with my experience. But anyway, Shane let me know that, you know, some of the reasons as to why Karen did not offer me a permanent position was because she noticed that I was not taking notes during training, which I feel like is such a stupid reason. And I mean, people on TikTok and even people in my personal life agree that this was a stupid reason to let someone go from a job. You know, again, this could have been something where if it was such a concern for her, she could have had a conversation with me. But the truth is, I struggle to take notes because of my disability, and I let him know that. I actually disclosed my autism diagnosis on this call. I didn't disclose it before because I was so worried about losing my job, you know, or losing out on the permanent opportunity before I began to really hate this job. You know, I didn't want them to see me as a burden because I might need accommodations as a disabled person. So, you know, I intended to keep my diagnosis, you know, a secret from them until at least after I was offered permanent work. But obviously that didn't happen. You know, but I told him, and he literally said, yeah, you know, that makes sense. You know, so another thing that was said was that there was also concerns about how I was communicating with vendors over email, which again, there was no conversation about that. You know, as an autistic person, I have a more direct communication style. You know, it's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's just I communicate more directly. That's how I know how to communicate. That's what's natural for me. But I'm honestly convinced that the real reason that this employer chose not to offer me a permanent position was due to the fact that I didn't fit into their little family. Because, you know, I sat at my desk all day and I actually did work instead of chit chat. And I think that's so unfair. And actually, I have contacted the EEOC regarding this situation, and I'm meeting with them in January because I do think that there was some discrimination going on because, you know, the fact that there was no interactive process, like Karen never talked to me about performance issues that she was seeing. She never gave me an opportunity to request support or to correct any issues. So I think my theory is that Karen was just looking for some dumb excuse to get rid of me, because the real reason was that she didn't like me because I wasn't social and I wasn't fitting into her clique. And I kind of wonder if, you know, again, what Shane told me when I was initially offered the job, that, you know, you're replacing someone that wasn't performing well. By not performing well, do they mean they're not social enough? I don't know. But the position has since been filled because they reposted the position to replace me, and it was recently filled. So I will be checking back on the Randstad website to see if that position is back up in like around December. And if it is, I will laugh my ass off, because that will indicate that maybe that person didn't fit the mold, you know, the social mold that she was looking for. Not that they were bad at bookkeeping, but just they weren't worthy for the clique. But yeah, this is such a rant, and I don't even want to know how long this video is, but I just wanted to share this because I think that there needs to be more awareness on this. You know, a lot of autistic people have great work ethics, great skills, you know, and things that they can bring to the table, but places do not want to give them a chance, you know, because maybe we don't fit in in socially, you know, but I really think that we as a society need to evaluate how, you know, the work environments that people are working in, and whether or not these type of work environments would be, you know, suitable for neurodivergence. And we also need to be willing to provide accommodations and to create environments where people feel safe asking for accommodations. Because that was another thing. I didn't feel safe. You know, I didn't want to ask for accommodations and have that cost me the job opportunity. But yeah, if you enjoyed the rest of this video, because I know it's long, comment down below. If you've had a horrible job experience, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to comment that as well. And if you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know what other videos you would like to see next. Yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.